Now, the second model I want to talk about is a very recent paper by Emiliano Pagnotta from Imperial College, and he presented this at the 2019 Toronto FinTech Conference and won the best prize for the best crypto economics paper. And so he has a very clever model which treats Bitcoin as decentralized money. So what he develops is an equilibrium model of demand and supply for this decentralized money. Now, why would you want to hold it is the first question. Well, this is similar to the other model I described. There could be transactional services, there could be speculative value, and there could also be network externalities. So if many people actually use the cryptocurrencies, you could have some network externality effects that make it more useful for you personally. Now, there's pros and cons of this. Now, the pros of money are, generally speaking, it is censorship resistant, which means essentially nobody can take your money, unless they have the private keys and can steal it from you. Nobody can go and impose excessive inflation on your money, as if you live in a Latin American country in the 1990s, you would know what that means. The downside is it is potentially hackable. So, somebody may be able to hack the blockchain and, have launch a 51% attack and the like. So there's an intrinsic attack that you could have on the network as a whole. And we're not talking about the hacking of you as a potential holders. All right. Now, the thing about hackability of it is that it would affect both the market value and also the usefulness. So the way this model basically says it works is once the network has been hacked, that's it. The value of it is entirely zero. Now, how's the network security here provided? So again, this is not about somebody stealing your private keys. This is about the security provided by miners to maintain the chains. And so what these miners do is they would do two things. They enable the transactions, and then they provide security that way. And for their services, they get paid in the native cryptocurrency. Now, one key concept that Emiliano defines is the so-called unity, which means that a token is both a means of exchange and it is also used as an incentive to the miners to maintain the network. So let's take some examples. The DTCC that does the settlement for securities trades or stock trades in the US. There's a question of, are there multiple verifiers? No. Is there free entry for verifiers? No. What's the asset? Well, it's public equity. Is there unity? No. Bitcoin and Ether both are native cryptocurrencies. They have multiple verifiers. They have free entry, and people get paid in the native cryptocurrency for the services of the mining. Now, how about Ethereum tokens? Well, again, those are the transactions, and those are verified by multiple parties. There's free entry for verifiers, but it's not the native currency on the Ethereum blockchain, and therefore this is not a unity token. And if you take Ripple, Ripple has multiple verifiers, yes, but they don't have free entry for verifiers, right? Because Ripple is controlled by the Ripple network, and therefore this is also not a unity token. Okay. So now, what are the basics of the model? Well, number one is we have long-term miners, and then we have overlapping generations of users, just as in the model that I presented a minute ago. So now what happens is that the users enjoy transactional benefits when they're young and when the network is alive. Attacks can happen in a period, and if it does, then the network is essentially dead. So this graph here is from Emiliano's paper. Essentially what you have is at time t, the generation consumes goods, buys bitcoins, miners mine. There could or could not be an attack. And then in the t+1, there's another sale of bitcoin and consumption of goods and an exchange between the young and the old generation. So the objective function here of a user would be to maximize the transactional services and the resale value, subject to the network security minus the costs that they have for all these activities. Now it's the miners' problem. Now the miners have a different problem. What they need to do is they need to figure out how much hashing power they want to provide to this network. So why does that matter to them? Well, there's two things. Now, hashing is costly, right? So this is the investment that you make into the operation, into the your graphics card that you use for mining. But if you do have more hashing power, you also have higher chance of winning a prize. So this is the positive impact of making an investment in hashing power. So, and the way this model does it is the expected payoff that you get, project payoff, is proportional to the hashing power. and you don't keep the block reward here. So the way it works is once you get your block reward, you immediately cash it out. So you're really not a long-term investor here. You just cash out into the fiat currency that is implicit there. All right, now, so what does an equilibrium here look like? Well, there's multiple things. Now, there's a value of Bitcoin that affects basically the the willingness of people to buy the coins and use them in the future. There's the mining output. The mining output determines the security in a positive manner. And the more security there is, the higher is the price that people are willing to pay for future Bitcoins, because it's more likely that they're going to be around in the future. So this is essentially in equilibrium, these three items have to be determined in equilibrium. Now, so what Emiliano then shows is that the equilibrium price is a function of multiple things. It's the network effects, it's the risk aversion of the users, it's the technology. So network effect is really the size of the network. The money supply, that is how much Coinbase reward is being offered, and the monetary regime. So that is the growth rate of the monetary reward over time. And so this is really cool because it actually captures the major components of what determines how much miners are willing to invest, how secure the network is. We recently saw that there was an attack on Bitcoin Cash. So that's not very clearly not a very safe network, and so on and so forth. And we saw the decline in mining power as the Bitcoin price has declined recently. So, what Emiliano then shows, he starts with a very simple equilibrium where he looks at the case where there's actually no mining. So this would be like, not ERC20 tokens as a network. Now, what he shows there is, there is an equilibrium. There's a stationary equilibrium across time. The problem with this equilibrium here, so this is this point B, is that it is not stable. So any deviation for whatever reason of the Bitcoin price, of the price of their token from this equilibrium price, would essentially lead to a cascading effect. So if the price is slightly smaller, then miners would reduce the amount of mining that they, then users would be less willing to put money into it. That means miners are less willing to put, there's no mining here, but there's, basically it's a cascading effect. So then he looks at competitive mining. So now there is also an equilibrium. So depending on, for instance, if you have a convex cost function, there too you can show that there could be equilibria where there's an unstable equilibrium, stationary equilibrium. And I should also note that the price P equals 0 for the cryptocurrency is always an equilibrium. But there are, generally speaking, if you have, for instance, linear mining costs, there are two equilibria, stationary equilibria. There's lower equilibrium, B lower bar, and there's upper equilibrium, B upper bar. And what happens is that the lower equilibrium here is not stable. Is stable, and the upper one here is intrinsically unstable. So now how does this work? Well, so basically the idea is, so the nice part here is that this here is if there's any small deviations in prices would gravitate back to this lower level here. Now, what Emiliano also shows is that there is a minimum network size. You can see there's an equilibrium here, which would be this tangency point, such that there is an equilibrium at all with a price that is not equal to 0. So if the network is just too small, then people would not be willing to participate. The miners are not willing to provide, so there's no positive prices. People don't want to do any interactions. The miners are not willing to provide security, and that is the end of the network. All right, so then he does a lot of interesting comparative static results. So first he asks what happens if the number of miners goes up. Well, then usually the total hash rate that is provided goes up. So it means security goes up, which means that the price goes up. It's a very intuitive result, but it's an important one. It also looks at the limit case. So suppose we let the miners go to infinity. So we mean we have essentially a perfectly competitive market for mining. Well, first is that there is still a finite limit price that would pertain to equilibrium. And there's also a well-defined minting price. So that's the amount of money that miners have to receive in equilibrium in order to be willing to provide network security. And he has has a numerical example there where the mining, the price, which is the minimum, the minting price that you have to provide, and the mining price, the equilibrium price, is about on the order of 2 to 1. So that's a remarkable result too. Now, it also looks at questions such as optimal monetary policy. So if you have changes in the growth rate of the Coinbase reward, does that necessarily lead to an increase or decrease in the value of Bitcoin? And what he shows is that there is actually a optimal amount, if you want, if you think of the market capitalization means the total value of, or the price, if you want, of the market, so that the ecosystem as a whole has a maximum amount. So for very high monetary regimes where you have a lot of inflation, if you want, where you have a lot of new coin-based rewards offered, the value of the entire market can shrink, and for low ones it also shrinks. So what we have here is essentially that there's an optimal price. Okay,